Okay, we should be good to go. I see there's a question from Ken Gross, but that looks like it's very much directed specifically to you, Bob. So that might be a better one to answer
Q&A.
offline. Might be more.
Okay, I don't.
Has to do with us, whether or not this is a select board meeting or an official meeting of any kind.
We've already made statements about.
Yeah, so I mean, we're going to go through the same thing again. It looks like maybe just a need to clarify the purpose of the meeting and whether or not, well, good afternoon. In your instructions, you said this is not a select board meeting or an official meeting of any kind. Are you representing a town committee or a town working group, or are you legally a private group of citizens?
Well, we don't have a quorum for select boards. We can't be a select board meeting. We're not an official committee. We are a working group engaged in various forms, but this is not the entire working group either. There are other people who are involved here, including consultants and others who are not present today.
So why don't we start, and you're going to want to say that all over again as part of your welcoming and open, and then we'll move on.
Sorry.
Allison, are we ready to go?
Yeah, I think definitely.
It's after 12, so let's move. Good afternoon. Welcome to the third and final listening session in this topic. Of course, I'm Bob Falciani. Yes, I am chair of the select board and also a citizen. Others will introduce themselves as we go forward. The main purpose of these sessions has been to solicit some ideas, input on comments regarding basically the changes to the harbor and the removal of related changes to the harbor, seawall, et cetera, and related to the removal of the Montgomery Dam. As you all know, in 2018 we started a study with Interfluve, and the recommendation was removal of that dam. A lot of work, that information will be discussed in a few minutes with you in more detail, of course. We've had some sessions in the last few months on the matter of that report, and one of the clear messages we received was that people were interested in discussing, hearing about, seeing a visual about could it look like if we were to remove the Montgomery Dam. That's the focus of today, to focus on that activity. To that end, we have heard from people who are against the removal of the dam. This is not the session for that kind of input, although we recognize it and appreciate it. As we go forward, the design, we have a grant, as you know, to design, or you don't know, we have a grant to design the Montgomery Dam removal in the head of the harbor in conjunction with our friends at the library trustees. And that will proceed. That's why we're looking for that input now into that design. In the future, there are going to be other events like these, as well as, if we go that far, public hearings and select board meetings on taking this matter further, even as far as to the voting public. So those are the forums where it's most effective if individuals are against something. That's where we want to hear that. It's just this forum is not what that's about. And to the question, again, to repeat, yes, I've said this is not a select board meeting. We do not have a quorum here. I'm here just to help moderate the meeting, frankly, and to contribute what knowledge I have in the area of what we've done. We are not a committee, and we have a lot larger group of people working on this activity, including consultants, many others. There are, interested parties here. I'm not here in any official capacity. I can't, because to have a meeting with a select board, I'd have to have a quorum, of course. That could happen in the future, but it's not now. But with that, again, if there are any questions as we go along, please feel free to ask in terms of where we are at. That will be described again in a few minutes by others who will be introduced. To start off the program, as we have in others, I want to introduce a person who will be speaking to the concepts and rough ideas that are available today on what it might look like out there. And that's Tony Grassi, good friend and resident of Camden from us 2 decades now. For your information, Tony is a former investment banker from many years ago in his life in Connecticut. He's also been very active in the Nature Conservancy, including chapters in Connecticut, the international or global Nature Conservancy, as well as the Maine Nature Conservancy. He's been involved with the University of Maine, Oregon's Mitchell Center for Sustainable Solutions. And most poignantly, is head of the campaign committee for Penobscot River Restoration Trust. Its intent is to eliminate fish pasture, and I believe it's 3 dams, Tony, on the Penobscot River. He's also been involved in his spare time with the renovation of the mill at Freedom Mills on Sandy Stream in Freedom, home of the mill school and the Lost Kitchen restaurant. And that was restoration, not a removal in that project that Tony was involved in. So with that intro, Tony, maybe that's why we have you here, to take the lead onto our next phase, which will be at your discretion.
Super. Thanks, Bob. Welcome, everybody, and hi to those of you who I know and whom I know, I guess we say, and hello to those who I've not yet met. I'm just citizens of Camden, and I'm really interested in this project. I'm a huge believer in river restoration where it's appropriate and feasible. And as Bob said, I was deeply involved in the removal of 2 dams and the bypass around the 3rd in the main stem of the Penobscot, an enormous project that we finished a couple of years ago now. And on the flip side of that, I had a look at Sandy Stream and Freedom and an old mill there, and that was a place where it was appropriate to actually keep the dam in place, and restored the mill and the dam and installed some hydropower. So I've sort of been on all sides of the issue of historic rehabilitation, dam removal, so forth. Our sort of as Bob said, what we're trying to do is get input into sort of the design options around removal of the Montgomery Dam, the questions of sort of how should it look, what are people's priorities, what are their observations, and so that we can come to sort of the most scenic and most effective fish passage solution that we can come up with, and one that will be helpful for in the issue of climate change, as you know, the risk of flooding in the river grows, and the risk and the impact of sea level rise. So these projects are all they're sort of intertwined, all these activities at the harbor, and in turn working back upstream. What we'll do is Allison will give us a background and history on sort of how we got to where we are today, and then we'll show you. A number of people have already sort of said, gee, how about this? Why don't you think about that? So we actually asked Interfluve to have their landscape architect do a few sketches to sort of visualize what it might look like. And I'll go through some of those, but what we really want is your reaction to those and your thoughts about other things that we should consider as we think about removal of the Montgomery Dam. So the other thing I would do is introduce briefly the other people you see on the panel. Audra, you probably, all of you at least know Audra from afar, but she's our town manager and has been deeply involved in the town's approach to studying this issue. Matt Bernier is an engineer with NOAA, located in Orono, and he's been for about 20 years involved in various dam removal projects and fish restoration here in the state, including not only the Penobscot, obviously, but also the Sheepscot, the Bagaduce, and so forth. So he's got an enormous amount of experience on how these projects work, and also has real insight into funding opportunities for restoring fish passage that we could tap into to reduce any burden on the taxpayers of the town. And then lastly, Nate Gray, who is a fish biologist with Department of Marine Resources. I got to know Nate through our work on Sandy Stream and the Freedom Mill. But again, Nate's been involved in all these, and he's our resident expert on exactly what works for fish passage and the like. So those are people that we'll tap into as you all come up with various questions. So from here, let's take it to Allison. Let her give you a little slideshow and some history and how we got here, and then then I'll show you some of the sketches, or Allison will show them and I'll explain them. So Allison, all yours. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Tony. The other thing that I would just say is that we've started out in webinar mode here, so nobody can, the attendees can't be seen or heard yet, so you can feel free to have a little bit of background chatter and that won't bother anybody. We're keeping it in this mode for the presentation portion of it to make it easier to show the slides. Throughout that time, you can feel free to use the Q&A or the chat to kind of put up your questions as they come along. But then also at the end, we will open it up, and those who would like to come onto the screen and be sort of more a part of a conversation, we will do that. So at that point, we'll use the hand raising feature of Zoom, but feel free to put any questions that you have in the chat. So I'm going to go ahead here and share my screen, share the sounds, and then turn on this annotate feature. And there we go. So this is a big topic, and I think we struggle a little bit just to get to the point sometimes where we can have a conversation about the design of something. As much as we'd like to be able to just focus on the design, we also recognize that there are a lot of details that have gone into this, and there's really no way to talk about the best design without also kind of talking about the reasons why and how we got here. This has taken a lot, even for some of us who have lived all of our lives in Camden, looked at this dam and the harbor and the river for our entire lives. We realized when some of us were faced with quick decisions needing to be made about the dam on the select board that, not all of us even knew what the Montgomery Dam was. And I think that that is a really common thing in Camden. Even just knowing how a dam works is not basic knowledge that people have. And so really do not hesitate to ask what might seem like the silly question, because a lot of things that seemed obvious, that may seem obvious now to some of us are really not obvious. And we certainly recognize that. A lot of us think of dams as being for flood control. And if you take out the dam, then you're going to have more flooding. There are all kinds of different dams. So understanding the history of this particular dam and the purposes that it has served, and kind of issues that we're having with it right now and some of the opportunities is definitely an important part of talking about the design. And I think just to reflect a little bit more on sort of the purpose of this meeting too, it's that we really have recognized that the desire to talk about this issue and all of the details that go into it far exceeds the amount of time that we could ever allocate during select board meetings. And so I think, many of us, be it me or students from the watershed school or different people, have just kind of volunteered some additional time to try to be able to meet that community desire to talk more about this. And we know that this is not the last discussion. It's just the last in this series of 3 that we did right off, but the discussion will continue. And also more than happy to come to any individual groups that might want to have a conversation about this. Of course, I can only represent myself, and Bob can only represent himself, and not the whole select board at any given time, but just wanting to help people talk more if they desire. So some of the basics here of the Montgomery Dam: it was built in approximately 1771 to power a grist mill by William Minot, who's one of our first settlers, who got permission to settle here from the 20 associates. And one of the requirements for him to get his plot of land was to build a mill at the first and most accessible falls that could be found on the Montgomery River, and to operate that and to keep it in good condition for 10 years. And so this was really the first mill in the area and the first falls that could be found. And the reason that a lot of dams are actually built on existing natural waterfalls is that they're looking for a place where the grade differential is already enough that it facilitates that spinning of the power wheel. So there are a lot of different ways that it's been set up, and there have been actually multiple dams in this one area because it does kind of have a natural fall. It's been rebuilt several times. The configuration's been changed a little bit. In 1930, it was incorporated into Lower Harbor Park, which was then called Shorefront Park. And the design of it was attached to the sluiceway and the seawall. But then you fast forward to 1992. And that's when it became a town-owned dam. It was a donation, and at that time it was given the name Montgomery Dam. It's one of 4 town-owned dams that we operate, one of 6 operational dams between Camden Harbor and Montgomery Lake. The town employs a dam control agent who's also our wastewater superintendent. And so really right now, this this gate here is what is left closed most of the time. Right now in this picture, you see it in the open position, but it's left closed most of the time, and that creates the overfilling of this pool, which then spills over and creates the additional mill pond and falls effect. It's in 2017, 2018, there was some need for repair, both aesthetic repairs and then also some issues that the insurance company had. And the bids came back for that work higher than what had been budgeted for. And so that prompted a lot of questions when it came up on a select board agenda. I remember it was one of the earlier things that came up when I was elected, and I had all kinds of people saying, why is the town even, doing this? Why does the town have this dam? What is its purpose? And we realized, some of us couldn't answer that very well. And so before we put, over $100,000 into kind of maintaining the status quo there, we really felt we owed it to the community to understand things a little bit better. So we did a study, and I'm just going to first go through here real quick and show you some photos. This is the earliest known photo of the Montgomery Dam. It's somewhere around 1860s. And you can kind of get a sense here, this ledge basically still looks the same. But some of the infilling here of Harbor Park, of this intertidal zone, hadn't happened yet. You can really get a sense for the fact that the dam goes, it's more than just, this would be sort of like the concrete part that we see today. But the dam actually extends all the way over to the bank of Harbor Park here. And it's, this would be sort of the main part of the dam. And then this part over here, which is what we see a lot of the time, is considered the spillway. And so the lowest part of the ledge comes down over here in what is now Lower Harbor Park. And so it is believed, and one of the results of the study was that the main original course of the river would have been more sort of down through here over the ledge. This shows around the turn of the century, around 1900, sort of the evolution of things. They had become very good at capturing most of the water. And you can see it's almost all, the main purpose of this dam was to push the water over here, and it powered this grist mill. And then also there was an anchor factory, among other things. There was a second dam here, and then some series of flumes that would capture any spillover as much as possible. And that was used for power too. So you can see there's a lot of vegetation here in the center island. There's trees and even grass here. So at times we've been better at others than at capturing all of that water. So here's just sort of another view of it, showing there used to be this second pond here. You can see the spillover that's happening here. So it's really looked a lot of different ways over the years. This is more what we're used to looking at today. This would be kind of like a low flow situation. This is the concrete part, but again, the dam extends quite a bit more toward the right. Here's another view, kind of showing, interestingly enough, here there's really no vegetation at all. And this was before just before the building of Harbor Park, a little bit before the fire that took out everything over here on the public landing. You can get a sense here again for where the dam is and where the river was kind of busting through. You can see just a little bit here pushing through the dam. Today, this has all been filled in to about here. This is that lower section of Harbor Park that we're seeing so much flooding in. This shows after the seawall and sluiceway were connected into the dam here. Got a little bit of vegetation growing up. This is probably similar to what people, the people that, those of us, or those people who really, like this look of the dam, sort of that perfect cascading infinity pool effect. I think this is probably a pretty good example of, that looking maybe just as it should from that perspective. Lots of different perspectives about what is beautiful here, but I think it's good for everybody to kind of know, if you haven't seen it when the concrete has all been perfectly uniform, that's the effect that some people are talking about missing. So we did a lot of research into the dam. The beginning of it, some of it was driven by fish passage interest, seeing a lot of the other projects happening in Maine with the removal of dams and the installation of fish passage. I think a lot of people were wondering, okay, well, what's happening in Montgomery and why do we have this dam? So that was one of the focuses. The results of the study did, of course, show that Montgomery Dam is a complete fish passage blocker, and that sea run fish, those fish that need to spawn in fresh water, that there are a number of species which would be likely to repopulate the Montgomery River and eventually the lake if passage were available. But we also learned a lot of things that we didn't understand very well to begin with, and that relates to flooding. So we found that the dam significantly increases the risk of flooding to buildings in the immediate vicinity. That the main purpose of it right now is aesthetic. That removal of the dam would impact Harbor Park and the seawall. And so at the beginning of all of this, we kind of thought, okay, well, maybe full removal isn't even possible, because the dam isn't just this concrete part. The dam is this, all of this section here. So hopefully this seawall and all of this can just hang on for a while longer, and we can separate these two issues, and maybe only this part of the dam could be removed. As we've been seeing the effects of climate change and watching the degradation of the seawall and understanding the issue a little bit better, we've come to realize that these two issues are maybe inseparable. We found that removal of the dam would reduce the long-term costs of operation and maintenance to the town. This is something that was not well understood by us before, that so much staff time is going into monitoring the dam. If we were to leave the gate of it open all the time, there wouldn't be so much that would need to happen. But because in order to create this sort of waterfall effect over here, the gate has to be closed down. So that requires two people to operate it, and then requires constant weather monitoring to make sure that if we're getting rain or if a lot of water needs to be let out of the lake, that this gate can be opened. And even then, it often doesn't prevent the flooding. We learned that, of course, removal would provide the greatest opportunities for ecological restoration and for sources of funding. And that, of course, it would also result in the greatest amount of change in one of the most historic and beloved parts of town. So complicated issue here. This is a FEMA flood map, and shows sort of the basics of the impact of the dam on surrounding properties. It doesn't get into all of the details here. You can read all the details in the Montgomery Dam feasibility study, which is over 100 pages long and on the town website. But basically, these flood maps that the federal government puts out, and that the town is required to adopt, and that insurance companies are looking at all the time to decide how much we all have to pay. Those calculate the risk of flooding during extreme events. And it shows here these major balloons that you see happen to correspond with the impoundments of dams, because we're taking an area that a river that might have been 2 or 3 or 4 feet deep in places, and turning that into 10 or 8, 10, 12 feet higher in certain places. And so just as your bathtub is more likely, or your bathroom is more likely to flood if you have your bathtub completely full and then you turn on the shower, it's kind of like that for these dams. They're not built for flood control. These lower ones, the upper watershed is a different issue, but they are built to store water to have available to power water wheels. So that's why storing all of this water all of the time does create a significantly elevated flood risk. Then, of course, these are just some of the species of fish that have been found in the harbor. In the first presentation that that we gave, we kind of glossed over this habitat issue, and we got some comments saying, why didn't you talk at all about fish? So that has been the part that we kind of figured that a lot of people already understand, but just to reinforce that why part of the reason that there is so much grant funding available, and I think so much interest from some residents, is that we do see a lot of sea-run species, or even possibly just trout from the, these are all trout and alewives that have been seen in the harbor. It's often unknown whether the trout are sea-run or if they are just trout from the upper watershed that have tumbled over the falls and are unable to get back to freshwater. But regardless, they all fight pretty hard to try to get back up in there. This is just a little bit of the, the history of flooding in Camden. Although for most of us, it's not a part of our daily lives or our daily concern from a town planning perspective. It is a major concern and has been in the past. In 2005, 2006, this wasn't even 100-year storm that we're all told we should prepare for. This is more like a 25 or 50-year storm. And you can see the Camden Town Report that year referred to it as the year of the floods. The harbor master, Steve Pixley, like to say that the river exploded that year, and that we got tons of water. The lake was flooding, and all this water coming down into the harbor. It has a pretty big impact on the float system, depending on where the water is sort of rocketed towards. And one of the things that it's had an effect on in the past is the seawall here, because the sluiceway, sorry, there's a really big truck going by. The sluiceway, which is where the water comes out if you open the gate, that blasts out here, and it has a pretty big effect on this corner of this seawall here. So some of those repairs were funded by FEMA, and kind of gets to the part where some of the reason that a lot of this funding exists is because there's been a shift at the federal government level, and even insurance companies trying to think ahead, that instead of just going around and funding all of this cleanup afterwards, let's try to encourage planning to happen and infrastructure to be designed in a way that is less likely to fall apart and is more resilient to these types of storm events. Some of what we've heard from people, and we've heard quite a bit, we've been having listening sessions on the Montgomery Dam, be they in select board meeting rooms or the grocery store, for about 3 years now. And that's been really helpful. Actually, we've learned a lot from residents. So we've heard everything from, do what is right for the environment. How do we know what is right? Please try to avoid spending taxpayer money. Lots of interest in studying the rest of the watershed in order to develop a comprehensive plan before being asked to vote on taking action at any specific site. And that also gets to the, this voting part. I want to make sure that I'm clear that the select board certainly understands very well that this isn't a decision that we can make by ourselves. It's a decision the town manager or any one entity can make by ourselves. It's like everything in Camden, really, it's going to be voted on. This one, because it likely will affect Harbor Park, also has an additional layer where the Library Board of Trustees is a major player in this too, as they actually have legal control over Harbor Park as part of the deed from Mary Louise Curtis Bach when that property was gifted to the town. We've heard concerns about historic preservation, enhancing or restoring that postcard worthy look. We've heard people say we want it to get back to nature. We've heard people say they don't want anything to change from the way it is now. Of course, they need to work with Main Street and other businesses. And then overwhelmingly, lots of support for planning for climate change and encouraging us to do so. So here is kind of a photo that Jeff Senders took during one of our flooding events. This was a high tide event, which actually wasn't expected to be quite this high, but we often refer to Camden as where the mountains meet the sea. It's also where this the McGonagall River watershed meets downtown Camden and rising sea levels. So it really, at this one site, we have the ability to see lots of aspects of climate change all kind of coming together. So we have the increased rain events and the flooding that's associated with that, meeting rising sea levels, and the Harbor Park is impacted by the rising sea levels, and then also this, the water here from the river. I'm just going to show a quick video here that I think will kind of help people see why this is having a much faster impact and larger impact than we kind of anticipated in our planning on this seawall, and why it seems like maybe it's going to be sooner rather than later that we have to do something. Just pause this here for a second so it can catch up. This was a day when the tide was supposed to only be at 11.3 feet, which normally is not enough to overtop the seawall, but just a little wind in the right direction can really change that. And so we're seeing really minor overtopping events, roughly 4 to 8 times a month. But then this kind of stuff is also happening many times a year. There you can see how at high tide, the water from the river actually comes over and makes it into Harbor Park. It's carried by the sea. The area right behind the dam, that's at the gate all the way up. So letting as much water out of there as possible, but still seeing some minor flooding at the lower part of the building. We've heard from the owner that floor isn't getting wet, apparently, but
the water just flopping the benches.
really caught everybody by surprise, I think, that day. And this goes on to show some of the flooding around the rest of the watershed, but we won't get into that today. But so that is what has facilitated or brought us to the point where we realized that we'd really be missing a big opportunity if we tried to treat these issues as completely separate, because the seawall and the dam are really completely intertwined. So you can see here just a little bit of the example of what's been happening to the area after these events. If you've been down around there, we've tried to do some kind of short-term patching. There's a lot of crushed stone in there now, but that's only going to work for so long. So we have done some talking with the Library Board of Trustees. They've also done some talking amongst themselves, quite a considerable amount of it, actually. Anybody who was here on Wednesday heard Dave Jackson, the Parks Director for the library, talk a little bit about that. And I know we have some more library people, I think, here today. But basically, this is what brought us to the need to move forward kind of on two tracks. We heard loud and clear and from environmental organizations and residents and everyone that there's, of course, the need to study the rest of the watershed to understand everything from what the risks and costs and benefits are at each site and the fish passage opportunities, to the possibility for sediment transport and toxicity of sediment and all of those things. So we were fortunate to be awarded $139,000 from the National Coastal Resilience Fund, which is a nationally competitive grant program through NOAA and the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, as well as it's actually funded also by TransRe, the insurance companies. And so that is to extend the study that we did on the Montgomery Dam to the rest of the watershed to assess flood reduction and habitat restoration opportunities. We held a technical partner advisory meeting, really a series of those, and then also 3 public, broad public input sessions, all of which are available to watch on the Town of Camden YouTube channel. And that study is currently under technical review by partner organizations, and it's going to be released by the end of July. So that is one track. But then we also realized, okay, due to the severity of the seawall issues, we really need to move forward in assessing options there. So we received $40,000 from the Maine Coastal Program, $10,000 of support from the Island Institute to move forward, sort of taking what we learned from the Montgomery Dam feasibility study and combining that with this sort of now known urgent need to do something with the seawall to create a solution that would hopefully be, would restore habitat and increase the town's resilience to climate change with less of a need for ongoing maintenance. And the great thing about that is, I think broadly, those are pretty widely held town goals to be good environmental stewards and to be adaptive to climate change. There are also goals of a number of grant programs. And so we really check off a lot of boxes in terms of the goals of our project and the goals of those projects, which could be a great thing if we don't want taxpayers to have to pay for things. So this grant will give us design and engineering for a solution that could then be voted on and taken to construction. So again, no decisions have been made, but what this is going to allow us to do is to bring something to voters that would be highly likely to receive outside funding. So just quickly to show the really well-established increase in the magnitude of these 24-hour, 100-year extreme precipitation events, basically. not only are we seeing an increase in the total amount of rain falling within the watershed annually, but we're seeing these extreme situations where lots of rain falls really quickly. What that means for a watershed like ours, which is about 33 square miles, it encompasses about half of Camden, large parts of Lincolnville, a little tiny bit of Searsmont, and a little bit of Hope. Basically any drop of rain that falls within that area ultimately has to make its way underneath the Smiling Cow and down into Camden Harbor. And so when you combine the amount of development that has happened with this increase in storm events, we're really dealing with a lot more water, a lot faster than would have been dealt with historically here. And so this is just an example of something that is not even close to one of these mega storms. This wasn't even considered a 10-year storm event, but here we have the Bog Bridge town boat launch. Clearly, the McGonagall Lake is flooding over that, almost ending up into Route 105. This would be a major trigger that as much water as possible needs to be let out of the lake, because you're going to start seeing septic systems and camps and all kinds of things flooding along Norton Pond and McGonagall Lake. And just to quickly say this, because I know it will come up and is a frequent concern for people, there's zero discussion about removing either the east and west lake dams, which are the dams that control the level of water on McGonagall Lake and Norton Pond, or the Seabright Dam, which controls the level of water on the upper part of the river from around Shirttail Point to Mullino Road. So fish passage solutions are being looked at there, but definitely no dam removal. And because people do like the level of water to be fairly high on the lake, there's a limited range that we can adjust that level in anticipation of storm events. Some people have said in the past, well, why didn't the town just should have just lowered the level of the lake, by 2 or 3 feet before this last rain event? Well, that is often not a possibility in the middle of summer for both environmental and recreational reasons. We'd have a lot of upset people and a lot of upset wildlife probably too. And also when it rains really fast, it comes up really fast. So there's kind of this Sophie's choice sometimes, and you can hear Dave Bolstridge, our dam control agent, explain it, between flooding the properties along the lake, which also affects Lincolnville, and then flooding downtown Camden. So it's just a sort of back and forth game, and there's sometimes no way to thread that needle. So this brings us back to the sea level rise issue here. So there are a number of different scenarios that can be planned for. Of course, we all hear these sort of doom and gloom scenarios where we're going to be 10 feet underwater, and then we also hear people say, oh, there's nothing really happening. How do you decide what is the right number to plan for? And I think what we've come around to is that the Maine Climate Council recommendations are probably the best benchmark that we can use, and they suggest that towns commit to managing for 1.5 feet of sea level by 2050 and 4 feet by 2100. That, as you can see, puts us pretty far into Harbor Park. To raise up this wall by the amount that would be necessary to protect it would be a pretty extreme situation that would be dangerous, quite frankly. There are ways that maybe that could be workable, but it would be a pretty drastic change, and it would also one of the things to keep in mind is that this beach here, it was originally in the original design for Harbor Park, it was protected not so much for environmental reasons at the time. It was an effort to give the boats somewhere a grounding out space. But the result has been that this is really the only area of our harbor here that hasn't been filled in by wharves. And so we have this low tide and high tide zone where you can go, back and forth, and kids can look for crabs and all of that kind of stuff. So as the sea rises, it's important to realize we could, if we are to simply just build up this side of the harbor in the same way that the public landing has been built up, we would need to be prepared to lose kind of this beach area unless we employ kind of a little bit more of a managed retreat strategy in some areas. So thanks for bearing with me. I know that was a lot of repeat for some of you, but we're back to a nice rosy, beautiful looking Harbor Park and Montgomery Dam. And Tony is going to help sort of lead us through some of the designs, conceptual designs that have been envisioned so far. Thanks.
Thanks, Allison. That's hugely helpful, I think, in terms of perspective and sort of understanding urgency and priorities. The 2 points Allison made that I sort of want to reinforce is that the existing dam does increase flood risk back behind it. So that not only do we have a flooding problem from sea level rise, but when you get a major storm event, the flooding risks extend back to sort of the Bagel Cafe under those buildings back in there, and even perhaps as far as the town facilities. And when you eliminate that storage facility there, whatever water comes down is going to come, but you've allowed it to release into the sea without creating these flooding problems along the way. And the second is in terms of the waterfall, whatever water comes is going to go, and the question is only where does it go, and do you want an engineered dam, man-built dam structure, or do you want the river to flow over the ledges the way it normally would? And so you'll see in some of the sketches we're about to show, the issue isn't, is there a waterfall? The question is only where is it? There's a fair amount of water now, you'll see in this picture, that runs down the left side because the spillway out of that the pond behind the dam drops the water to the left side. That isn't its natural flow. That's because of the dam structure. The water's natural flow is to the right side over towards Harbor Park. So what we're now going to do, and this is a little hard to follow, I think, we're going to overlay some sketches on top of this. So try to get sort of picture in your mind where that seawall is now, coming down from the Smiling Cow, turning the corner and heading out. And then we'll layer the first sketch over that, and you'll see, try to remember that, and it's hidden underneath what's now in blue. So when you take the dam out and you let the water go, here's what it looks like, right? And obviously this varies depending on water, the extent of the flows and the storm events and so on and so forth. But you'll see here what I referenced over the left, you'll see a bridge sort of sketched in there. But above that bridge, there isn't any water flowing. That's now ledge. And underneath the buildings that are on Main Street and back up to the pool, that's also ledge. Right now, there's a bunch of silt there. The silt would be gone, and those natural ledges is what you would be looking at. And the river, wants to move over towards the right. And if could you do, maybe Allison, try a quick back and forth so people are reminded where the seawall is. There it is. And then what happens when you take it out. So you see what happens is essentially you move, the water wants to go over towards Harbor Park, and this is free-flowing river that allows migratory fish to get up past the Montgomery Dam. This is, they got up there over the millennia because there weren't dams there going way back, and obviously they migrated right up through here. So this is where they want to go. There are a lot of choices in how you design the sort of where the water flows. You can blast out rock, you can put in boulders, you can create pools. There are lots of things we can do, both from a enhancing fish passage and creating sort of visible pools where people could see the alewives. Damascata is the example of sort of a very engineered ladder, gorgeous, but obviously very constructed. So that's sort of one extreme. You can design lots of pools, or you can let the fish go where they will, and you can put boulders in and so forth. So now the question really is, sort of when you take out the dams, what else do you do? Obviously, over the years, there's been lots of conversation about connecting the public landing on the left with Harbor Park on the right. Maybe the dam removal provides some opportunities for that. So this is where brainstorming comes up, and we'll take you through some of these, and then hopefully others will sort of weigh in on not only questions, but sort of thoughts you have about what's important here. So the next slide would show you a little more, this is sort of an alternative. If the river flow on the right were dug a little deeper, you might have more flows over there, and you might create another island, if you will, that shows here. Again, it depends on what level flows you're looking at and so forth. So these are, remember, just sketches. They're sort of true to the topography, but they're not engineered solutions in any way, shape, or form. They're just sort of conceptual. So we'll kind of hone in on the backs of those buildings and see what some ideas are. One of the early questions was, geez, if you take the dam out, are you just going to be exposing a lot of ugly stuff underneath that holds up those buildings? And one solution to that is some kind of screening devices. So I think there's a more zeroed in picture of this, as I recall, Allison. Right there would show you, if you screen underneath the buildings to hide, you could just put in some lattice work and you could hide that issue pretty inexpensively and without creating a huge problem. Another sort of idea that people had, sort of thinking about, okay, if we're going to do that, why don't we think about connecting Harbor Park and the public landing through, over the years, people have talked about bridges. As we've talked about eliminating the dam, the idea that you could perhaps build a boardwalk, and that the store owners could, at their choice, either connect to or not, and people could walk out over the ledges and over the river. It would be handicap accessible from the right. Obviously, it couldn't be from the left, but someone in a wheelchair could go pretty far over until you had a drop in the boardwalk, and other people could come up and go over. The path for this could be right snug up behind the buildings, or you could sort of go further out away from the buildings, and run it over where in the area that Allison's showing you, where the dam currently exists. So there are lots of different ways you could think about doing this. One of the questions that came up was, geez, what makes the downtown Camden so beautiful, if you really stop and think about it, is the lack of power lines on Main Street. And you look up towards the library, and it took me a couple of years to figure out that that's why it looked so beautiful. If you stand at the bank and look up the hill, there are no ugly transformers, power lines, and so forth. So one of the thoughts was, maybe we could begin to eliminate some of the power structure that's behind these buildings and hide it underneath a boardwalk of some kind to enhance the view. Next slide looks at
That's zoomed
the
in.
thing in more, the boardwalk idea in more detail. And then then a question came up with, gee, could those buildings, if you eliminated the dam, could those buildings expand? And here we actually had some Gartley and Dorsey do some engineering work to determine what in fact would be possible. Not, it would have to be permitted and zoning changed and all the rest of that stuff to allow it, but physically, without the pools there, you could in fact extend those buildings if somebody wanted to, and if the town permitting process were to allow that. So that's a physical possibility. You could not do the two buildings on the right. They couldn't be extended. Then we looked also, what's next? There have been over the years, lots of ideas and sketches about bridge structure. This is a project that a senior at the Watershed School, Caleb Edwards, did a series of sketches, which I think he shared with the select board at one stage. But again, this is kind of just to stimulate people's thinking. You'll see here, he's got a little bridge coming in from the left, much like you saw in those earlier overlays. And then he's also created a walkway structure over on the Harbor Park side, both of which sort of end out on the ledges where, kids might want to go play, or you would see down lower tidal pools and those sorts of things. And he did a series of these sketches. Here's another one sort of further down where the benches now are, but set back obviously from where the benches now are, and would give access at low tide down to the sea. So those are some ideas.
I would just say quickly about Caleb, if you want to,
Yeah.
it was interesting to look at we hear a lot at the select board level from the people that are my age and older. And one of the great things about the relationship that the town has developed with the Watershed School is it's been a great opportunity to bring younger voices, many of which have lived their whole lives in Camden, but to see some of these sort of contentious town issues through the lens of really talented high school students has been really inspiring for me, and I think for others too, to hear what they think is important about Harbor Park. And Caleb he gave this great presentation, and it kind of talked about his vision of wanting to take Harbor Park and sort of expand it so that this whole part here that has been inaccessible and kind of part of the industrial public landing side a little bit, that, he says, okay, well, we have to give a little bit of this up here to sea level rise and because of the river, but then this upland area, and he puts picnic tables up here and, all kinds of stuff. There is a lot of landscaping that could happen here, but some people have said, well, oh no, we're going to be getting rid of part of Harbor Park. And Caleb's vision of it was, no, this would be, an expansion of Harbor Park, and just interesting to think about it like that.
The other thing, Allison, you've mentioned in earlier sessions and probably worth referencing again is the Olmsted committees that are looking at Olmsted parks across the country. We're not the only ones faced with these issues for Olmsted designed parks. You might talk a little bit about that for people's background.
Yeah, the timing of this is actually really exciting. And I actually just got a message from the executive director of the National Association for Olmsted Parks, who wanted to be with us today, but a scheduling conflict got in the way. But we're coming up on the 200th anniversary of the birthday of Frederick Law Olmsted. And he is, of course, the founder of modern landscape design, and his firm, his sons, sort of carried on his legacy, and they're the designers of Harbor Park and the Village Green. They participated in the amphitheater. They actually did a lot of designs for things around Camden that people might not know of. Some of them didn't even come to fruition, but the National Association for Olmsted Parks is doing a lot of outreach and education to try to help basically further the values of Frederick Law Olmsted and help other parks. A lot of parks are in danger, whether that be just because of reduced funding or because of climate change. And so many of them are struggling with the same things that we are, and they've done some absolutely fabulous webinars with experts from all around the country that are part of this network of Olmsted firm designed parks. And it's this really wonderful balance and perspectives between historic preservation and adaptation, because Frederick Law Olmsted was actually kind of a radical environmentalist at the time. Preserving green spaces in the middle of industrial villages and making them available to everybody, not just the wealthy, was a really radical thing. And Mary Louise Curtis Bach, who she hired the Olmsted design firm to do designs of really every property that she ever donated anywhere. And Camden is not the only place. So to be a part of that kind of progressive legacy of these public spaces, it's really exciting. And there's a lot we can do. I've talked to Dave Jackson a little bit about, we're going to try to figure out if there are ways that the town can get together with the library and do some additional events around that. But we did send these designs to the National Association for Olmsted Parks to get their suggestions on how we could go through a review process, and excited about what might come out of that.
Yeah, great, thanks. The only thing I would add, just from my own experience on the Penobscot, I would encourage anybody who really wants to get in and understand this, to understand what happened, for instance, at the Vesey Dam, which is the lowest dam on the main stem of the Penobscot. And it was a pretty spectacular industrial dam. Not spectacular like dams out west, but spectacular in our context here. And it was sort of a classic industrial dam. It was built to create a pool behind it so that they could control the timing of the water going through the turbines. Much the same reasons that the pools on the foot of the McGonagall were created. And the town of Vesey had lots of questions in the beginning about sort of the visual impact of taking out that dam. It is now absolutely spectacular. It is a beautiful flowing river And the people in the town of Vesey are wildly enthusiastic, and it's been an economic boon to that part of the world. The number of alewives, I think, Nate or Matt can correct me, but about the right order of magnitude. There used to be 2,000 or 3,000 alewives that would gather below the Vesey Dam. They couldn't get past. We're passing close to 3 million fish a year now through that area and up into the tributaries where they're spawning, and it's been a huge economic boon, not just to the towns along the main stem, but the villages up into the fingers of the Penobscot River. So it's enormously exciting, and I think we have in the McGonagall River this much smaller but sort of a great controllable project where with a couple of fish passageways, and in the Penobscot, we took 2 dams out. The third we left in and built a naturalized fish passage around it, and it's been enormously successful. So here in the McGonagall, we can get around the dams that need to stay to maintain the significant lake levels. But there are another half a dozen or whatever it is, 5 really, that 4 or 5 that can come out. A number of those are privately owned. 4 total.
3 or 4,
there's
3.5.
There's a relic, right?
Yeah, one doesn't have any kind of a gate structure or anything.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. So they're, so those dams can come out, and you suddenly have this opportunity for free-flowing fish passage. So with that, let's
Johnny, before you, we're going to,
Bob.
just want to segue, we're going to move it now, I believe, into Q&A with the attendees, correct? But I wanted to say, again, to be clear, good segue, Allison, regarding the discussion you had about the watershed school. They took interest, and they wanted to, admittedly by sketches, to provide input on some things to consider. Whether you consider them good, bad, or indifferent, they provided input. Now, we're not expecting people to come up with sketches and comments, but again, the focus of what we're trying to do here is a follow-on to a request we heard loudly in the last sessions of people that wanted to see what it might feel like and look like, as we've discussed already, if this dam is removed. And prior to going into design for that, that's what we're asking for today. And I know there's been some question about, some have come on to earlier sessions to basically say we don't think the dam should be moved. Understood, heard, very loud and clear. That those discussions we're not closing the door to those. We would never do that. We just believe, we know, and we're telling you there are sessions coming forward in the future where you please come to us in those sessions to address in public hearings or other formats with the select board and the town, any ideas of why something was wrong, why the process was not correct, why we want the dam to remain. That's great. That's going to come. But this, and some individuals have suggested that we cut off discussions. No, we're not cutting off discussion. We're just saying this is not the forum to have that discussion today. So with that, Allison, we have about 45 minutes left. I'm sure we'd ask people to raise their hand as attendees who'd like to comment. And I would like to give priority to the extent we can, because it is 45 minutes, to especially individuals who we haven't heard from in the previous 2 sessions. And then as time permits, we can get to the rest. Sound good?
yeah,
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, that's great. And will you sort of serve as MC here?
Sure, I can use the baton.
Thank you.
so one thing I heard from people last time is that they were unable to see who else. They kind of liked the format the first time where we let everybody come in.
Oh,
I think we probably have a pretty mature group here that maybe we could try that again, that anybody will promote everybody to the panelist level. And you can go through the raising the hands that way.
it's,
Or we can leave
So-
people, you know, you can raise your hand and then we'll leave you on the screen. You can turn your video off if you want. I don't know if you're comfortable with that, or, you know, I'll leave people on the screen after they raise their hand, and
Yeah, if you don't want your picture, we're just gonna go into normal Zoom mode here, and if you can just leave your name up and keep your video off if you don't.
right, whatever
Yeah.
you all,
if that's okay with you, just because I know there was some interest, some people want to be able to like see other people, and it wasn't the intent, the way we set this up, to make it so you couldn't see who else is
Okay.
here. So I'm just gonna go ahead and give
Why
people
don't
that option.
while you're attacking Allison, if you would, I will, let's bring in Ms. Rollins, because she raised her hand first.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
I want you all to know that I have watched the previous 2 recorded sessions, and so you've added little new nuggets of information every time, and I really appreciate that. Amy Rollins, I am a Camden born and raised, although I live in Lincolnville now. I work for the Chamber of Commerce, though my comments today are not chamber related. They are just my own personal questions. So the one thing that has been on my mind this past week has been that, so one of your earliest slides, Allison, showed that it was determined as early as 2017 that some work needed to be done on the Montgomery Dam. And I don't believe any of that work has been done. So it's now, 4 years later, and I'm wondering, what would the ramifications be today if that dam were to fail? And I don't know whether I mean fail because it gets stuck open or fail because it can't open the gate. So what can we do right now, or, in the next few months, or even the next few years, as we continue to study what we all want to have? What is the time frame for that?
So the work that needed to be done on the dam was mainly aesthetic, and Audra's here to jump in and correct me if I get anything wrong. But the concrete spillway is uneven now, and it allows for more water to pass in one place rather than another, and degrades that infinity pool kind of effect. What we've heard from people is that the sort of relative beauty of that is highly subjective. It's also caused more water to go toward that public landing side and create a more vigorous waterfall on that side, which some people like more than ever before. There's that wild look as opposed to the well-maintained look. So on that side, there is not a danger of the dam failing. That doesn't mean that it doesn't create numerous liabilities sort of all the time in terms of people being out on there, but that's kind of just like the status quo liability. The issues with the gate are not, the gate works. At any point though, the gate could become stuck, open, or closed. That is the same risk that exists with any dam. And so that, that does present a risk. It was unclear in terms of with the, we do inspections on the dams every year. And so that what we have not seen anything in the inspection report that creates an elevated risk of the dam failing, so to speak. And Audra, you can jump
Or-
in if I got anything
or
wrong
Tony-
there.
Or Tony
Yeah,
can
I would-
repeat.
I would say
Wait,
the biggest,
I was just saying also, if follow on, Tony, you could repeat what you said about what happens when the dam is removed. That's a failure. If we remove the dam, what it does to flooding potential. But go ahead, Audra, please.
I was going to say the biggest risk that that dam poses is if the gate was stuck and we couldn't open it. That's when we would have a flood risk if something like that happened. But all the other and that wasn't really the work that needed to be done on it. It was like Allison said, it was the fact that the concrete was sort of cracking and it didn't have that sort of even the infinity pool type effect where all the water flowed over it in an even level fashion. So that was sort of what the funds were committed towards fixing way back in 2017, or not way back, but back in 2017.
Oh, there was also a component of it that was going to, I think, look at lowering the dam as well. So that was rolled into the fix.
Right, and a lot of that
that
was
sense,
the
yeah.
function of the fact that in the summer months, we're experiencing, in the fall and in the spring, we're seeing more rain events that are, more rain is being dumped on us all at once. But the flip side of that is in the summer months, we're experiencing more drought conditions, and that's leading to, low lake levels, low water levels at the Seabright Pond. And of course, the result of that is that we can't put water, like we have to, even when the gate is fully shut, we still don't have water cascading over the Montgomery Dam. And so the idea back in 2017 was lowering the dam would help with that.
Is that going to answer your question, Amy?
I think so, yes.
Good to see you.
In terms of time frame, I think that's the ultimate question. How long does it take a community to arrive at a shared goal or consensus? And then the next step in all of this is going to be to take what we heard sort of back to the select board a little bit and back to the library and say, and the engineers and say, how close are we or aren't we? So
What do we have
Good,
next?
yeah.
Oh,
I know
sorry, go-
that there are some anxious Main Street business owners, to this process. So
Yep,
thank you.
yep. And we heard that loud and clear, Amy. Thank you for repeating that. Who's next on the list, Allison? I can't tell from the Holly.
I think there was Dennis McGurk had his hand
Okay.
raised, and I'm just bringing in people. Everybody, you can feel free to reach. I think some people are rejecting when I'm asking them to be a
Their hand up.
panelist. Oh no, it was Marty Wolf. I'm sorry, Marty was next.
Okay,
Go
can you hear me?
Go ahead. Yes, Marty, we can hear.
So I have two things. First, I remember in one of the talks we had about design, there was a staggered seawall or a stepped seawall or a terraced seawall. Was that part of the design we saw today? Any of that? Did any of that?
So that was a part of I think when I came to the library board at one of those meetings, I showed some examples of other places, and that was that is a big part of the discussion that still needs to happen. One of the things that organizations like NOAA and other environmental organizations are trying to encourage more of is more resilient shorelines, living shorelines. That can look a lot of different ways, from the very hardened approach to the soft approach, and finding what's going to work for us could likely be a combination of things. It doesn't, the design that was shown today doesn't really show that. It kind of is a more doesn't show much. There's a little bit of grass there, but we didn't want to go too much into that in this phase, because that needs some more discussion. need a lot of ideas for that, but yeah, so that doesn't show that.
Feedback.
But you're right that that needs to be part of the discussion. So what, and what you're seeing, oh, this is part of the reason why we sometimes don't do the, shoot, what was,
Well, to Marty, but to elaborate on your question, that your approach is oftentimes used, especially when the predictability of the future may be uncertain. You know, Allison showed the, 1.5 feet, the 6 feet. When you have a situation like that, it's kind of smart to do that approach because, it build a wall that is, you're done. That needs to be considered. But,
Marty, did you like the terrace seawall?
Sorry.
I was just wondering, did you like that kind of design, the terrace seawall? That's okay, great. That's the kind of thing that we're hoping that we can get folks to give us input into.
That's my personal opinion. That's not the library's opinion. Secondly, a VZ. So I'm thinking a VZ field trip would be really cool. And could we get a guided tour to sort of say, here's the before and look at pictures and here's the after and what was the process like? And that might be an interesting thing to explore. Thank you. That's all.
I think that's a great idea.
Hey, Bob, can I suggest that if you're not speaking, you go on mute until we're calling, because I think that's what's leading to some of the feedback. That would be better. And then as you call on people, they can go off.
I'll try to be in charge of making sure everybody's muted if they're not speaking.
Okay.
Nick, you have your hand up, and I see. I'm going to go by whose hands are up right now. It's easier. Nikki, go ahead. I can't hear you, Nikki. Sorry, Nikki. Can you hear? I can't hear you, Nikki. Something's wrong.
Maybe Nikki can put her comments into chat or the Q&A, and we can take them that way.
Good. Then I'll go Dennis McGurk. Dennis.
You're on mute, Dennis. There you go.
Still Zoom flaw. You're still on mute. But it's still on mute. This is getting to be fun. Allison, we didn't mute him, did we?
He's still muted.
Yeah, he's okay. I love electronics.
There we go. Now he's okay.
All right.
There you go, Dan.
All right.
There you go.
I have a couple questions. The sketches that you showed of possible solutions were interesting, but they appeared to be in relatively modest tides. And given that in the next 30 years, we're likely to have somewhere between 12 and 18 inches of sea level rise, that means the higher tides are going to come up much higher than are shown in the sketches. And I wonder, do you have any sketches that show high tide conditions for a reasonable amount of sea level rise? Because that would be important in determining how usable that portion of the park becomes.
Dennis, you are that is exactly what I said. And I was kiboshed a little bit because we were ending up showing too many drawings with too many lines. And, but we don't have, graphically sort of the tide running, but we do have a bunch of sketches with lots of those lines on there, because I totally agree with you.
I understand the lines are useful, but when you show an aesthetic picture like that, it gives an impression, and that's what people leave with, and it's not typical, and especially since not only will we have the astronomical high tides to contend with that are 1.5 feet higher, all tides will be 1.5 feet higher. And so therefore, the amount of time that area is usable is quite different than it would be considered by the casual observer. So I think that is important to consider, not just have a line on a map, because it does not convey the impression that these sketches do.
Yeah, the problem, obviously the problem here, Dennis, is to do this right, you'd have to show high flows, medium flows, and low flows at high tides, medium tides, and low tides. You know, it gets very hard to show, to give that robust.
I know that the number of cases could be extreme, but you have bounded it on the most optimistic way so far, and I think that's unrealistic, and it does not convey properly to people. I think if you wanted to pick a one or two other cases, it would be very instructive.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would have to agree with Dennis's comment. That's a good comment, Dennis. Thank you very much. Nikki, did you want to raise your hand again? Oh, Dennis, you done? Okay, Nikki, can we hear you now?
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Yay, okay, all right. So just a minute or two here. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Nikki Mayonis, the Executive Director of the Camden Public Library, and we're really pleased that the town is conducting these listening conversations, because we, the library trustees, we are very interested to hear what the citizens of Camden have to say as well. We do have a public statement, which is now listed on our website, in which those of you on the committee have already received. And I just wanted to read 2 or 3 or 4 sentences from that statement so that everybody who's attending today can get an idea of what the trustees are thinking at this point in the process. So one of the things that they say is that the original Olmsted design transported visitors into a quiet, scenic park away from the busy streets of Camden. That is really important to remember, because that is what the Olmsted brothers had in mind initially. And we believe that the historical and scenic value of the Olmsted design cannot be overstated. It is very important to the trustees. Again, back to the statement, environmental concerns, specifically sea level rise, floodwater runoff, and fisheries restoration are important, but again, are not the only considerations in our stewardship of Harbor Park. One more time, we will favor designs and concepts that save as much of the park as possible. And I think the committee already knew that, but again, I just wanted to state for the record that it's vitally important to the trustees that as much of the park as can be saved is saved, because this Olmsted design it just cannot be overstated. You know, the Olmsted brothers worked alongside Fletcher Steele. It's Fletcher Steele who's responsible for the amphitheater, by the way, not the Olmsteds. But the two worked in concert to produce these 2 beautiful parks just across the street from each other. And in my personal opinion, they are the jewels of Camden, and we need to preserve them as best as we possibly can. So I'll just wrap up by saying, again, I really wanted to thank you all for hosting today's talk. We really look forward to working with the committee. We do want to see designs. The designs that we saw were quite a while ago, and there has continued to be work done, and we are looking forward to seeing, you know, the new designs as they come up. So, and we do believe that much more conversation needs to happen and should happen with the citizens of Camden in mind. So, thank you.
Thanks, Nikki. Bob, you're on mute.
I don't think he's trying to talk, or maybe he is, I don't know.
I was mumbling. Thank you, Nikki, for coming aboard and always communicating with you all is great. Anybody else want to raise their hand and comment to the issues at hand? That's what we're here for. Any comments, especially on the, like Dennis's, I think those are the ones we've been hoping to hear more of, in Marty's too, on the seawall issue. Those are really, really, really helpful.
Also, there are 5 more people that are in the attendees that haven't, I guess, opted out of come. So anyway, if any of you guys change your mind, I won't keep asking you guys to to come in, but feel free to raise your hand and we'll bring you in. I'd also encourage everybody to look at the other sessions. We had some really great comments last time around and before too. So,
Allison, you might, I'd be interested in Matt or Nate's sort of observations about this, sort of the opportunity, and from a restoration point of view, what this signifies in their minds.
yeah, let's definitely, taking advantage of the fact that Matt Bernier and Nate Gray are here is definitely a good point.
Let me start with Matt.
Let's start with Matt. Yeah.
Okay, sure. Yeah. So my program, which is with the National Marine Fisheries Service, we're obviously excited about the potential here to restore sea-run fish to the Muguntucook River in Camden. And it's kind of our view that, Camden certainly has some wonderful assets. Your downtown, Harbor Park, the library, the other parks, the lakes, everything like that. But one thing that you've had missing for well over 100 years is the sea-run fish component. And so we think that every town in Maine deserves to have a river running through it that's teeming with fish. And so, kudos to all of you for thinking of that. And then the other thing I would say too, I've been following, I was asked to review the feasibility studies for the upstream dams and the Montgomery study as well. We worked on the VZ project. If you get up to the Sheepscot and go to Alna Head Tide or the Cooper's Mills dam removal, so those dam removals and parks were part of our work. And really, these things aren't incompatible. What you want to do with the park and the seawall and your downtown and the fish passage. And I think you're pretty close. You have a little more work to do, but you're probably pretty close to an elegant design that's going to meet, almost all of your design goals here. So I would encourage you to, keep working on that, look at the details, make sure that people share what they really like for those design goals, for those that aesthetics. And I think they're all compatible and can be accommodated here. So good job.
Thanks, Matt.
What about maybe you could talk in the previous session, you talked a little bit about the funding opportunities that are coming down the pike and sort of how the timing of this might fit into that.
Yeah, so it's kind of a hot topic right now, combining the environmental benefits with what we call the resiliency benefits, mostly related to water and flooding. So sea level rise or the flooding associated with dams that raise water levels upstream and affect buildings. I would direct people to just a couple of weeks ago, we had an event in Eastern Maine, the Machias area, where we had major road washouts. There was an article yesterday that came out, they're still counting the damages and it's already up to over $2.5 million. And people were stranded in their homes for days. They couldn't get out. They're still doing repairs, stuff like that. So it's very real. And the flood risk that we're seeing is we're seeing some of these coastal storms come in, stalling out in towns like Camden, and they're dumping amounts of rain that are sort of unprecedented. And like that event that happened a couple of weeks ago in Eastern Maine, that happened in June. So it wasn't associated with snow melt. It wasn't associated with a hurricane. It was June. And we had all of these major problems. So if you look at like my program that I work for, the No Restoration Center, the president's budget includes 40 million proposed for resiliency. So that's resiliency related to habitat like this, where you have seawall flooding, dam removal, opportunities for fish passage. That's what that for. And it's not only this administration, even in the past administration, the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation money that comes through our sister agency, the National Ocean Service, that started out as a $27 million program, went to 30 million. Last year was 33 million. May increase this year, but it's going to be that same amount. And again, they're looking for those win-wins between the environmental benefits, restoration, and really mitigating those effects of climate change from sea level rise and a warmer and wetter climate.
Thanks, Matt.
Great. Nate, do you have,
Sound is terrible, so we're having all kinds of breakups everywhere.
yeah,
I think it might partially be you. I'm not sure, but
Say
Nate?
again?
Nate, do you want to give your perspective on the opportunity here?
Yeah. Again, my name's Nate Gray. I work for the Maine Department of Marine Resources. 25 hours and 42 minutes ago, it was July 1st, noontime, and 22 years ago, Edwards Dam was removed on this
Hey, if-
day. And I worked at Edwards Dam for about, can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
I worked at
Broke up.
Edwards Dam for about 7 years prior to its removal. And what's remarkable, the discussion about the removal of Edwards Dam is, hauntingly familiar about the discussion of the removal of Montgomery Dam. There are many key components of it that are very similar. There was a beauty aspect to the Edwards Dam. People were used to seeing it. It was familiar. It was comforting. Fast forward to today, the result of the removal of that dam, and I can speak to Guntucook Lake as well, is what amounts to one of, if not the largest river herring run in the globe. That's what the potential was sitting behind that dam. Now the Penobscot's come online. They're playing a catch-up game with Kennebec as far as numbers go. The Guntucook stands to, if we get into that historical habitat, Guntucook Lake stands to have a run of at least 300,000 river herring per year, and that's just the river herring. Obviously, there's a huge potential for some recruitment of adult eels. Obviously, it's within the range of Atlantic salmon, utilizing that stream. Multiple other species, including the brook trout that Allison referred to. It's remarkable that you guys have started this journey kind of on your own, and it's quite a journey because there's a lot of stuff has happened to that stream in the past 200 plus years. Certainly when it comes to fisheries and sustainability, just ecological function, none of that was good. And the ability to get a system of this size back online near coastal system is a huge opportunity. Nikki from the library said that that the Olmsted Brothers Park and the amphitheater were the jewels of Camden. If this were to come to pass, this would be certainly one of those jewels, and not just any old jewel, a big fat diamond right in the middle of downtown. Quite a thing.
Thanks, Nate. Bob, you were having problems, I think. But the other question that we talked about last time with respect to, and if you're still having a problem, maybe Allison can answer it, but with respect to the sea level rise question is the sort of how is the town thinking, this is obviously there's this connection between the public landing and Harbor Park, and how's the town thinking about it? If you remember, for the audience, if you remember Allison's slide showing sea level rise, the public landing goes underwater in 2100 or something. So how is the town thinking about that, and is that part of the same conversation?
I can speak to that, Tony. So both sites, Harbor Park as well as the public landing, were included as part of Camden's piece of the Penn Bay resiliency study that was done in communities all over Penobscot Bay. And so we're very aware of the fact that the public landing at some point is going to need a significant amount of investment, and we're going to need to design the public landing to be more resilient to sea level rise. But if you look at sort of the flood profiles, you know, as the property owner, in terms of the landing, you know, where our investment is certainly going to be something that we need to protect into the future. So, you know, that's where this sort of all connects together, is that it would be, I guess, foolish of the town to design for resiliency in one part of the town and then not on another, that could affect our infrastructure. So, you know, that's why I think that we need to look at all of this together and you know, be looking at the resiliency design for the park, the dam, as well as the public landing, because they are so close, and also be working with private property owners as well, because they're at risk too.
Thanks, Sandra. I know
Oh,
that.
can I ask Nate one more question before we move on from that? So it's kind of come up quite a few times that just put a fish ladder in. That's the you know, sort of the win-win for everyone. You know, just put in a fish passage solution, and we can keep the dam, and we can keep the park the way it is, and we can all just get, you know, we can solve all those issues at once. Can you kind of speak to, you know, why that might not be the best solution in this case?
Yeah, Audra, I can speak to that. Fish passages, regardless of their type, whether they're a technical type fish passage or a nature type fish passage, they all have their advantages and their drawbacks. And I'll be brief here. The technical fish passages can work really good, but there's kind of a guessing game about siting the fish passage, the entrance, where's the entrance go? How do you best accommodate that? Camden's in kind of, it's not a unique situation, but it is fairly unique in that it's tidal. And so where the entrance of the fish passage goes in relation to the tide is very critical in order for the fish passage to operate as well as it could. And I've seen fish passages, you know, that are virtually nearly, or if not identical, at least in their layout, like at Neil. And even things like, you know, solar lighting can affect the overall fish passage efficiency. You know, which direction the entrance of the fishway enters, regardless of which way the water is going past the entrance of the fishway, can all impact how well a fish passage performs. And the further down this rabbit hole you go, you realize how complex it really is, the design of a fish passage. Now, policy-wise, the Maine Department of Marine Resources neither, you know, advocates for or against dam removal. But what that doesn't stop me from saying is there is no substitute in the form of a fish passage that will equal the efficiency or the longevity or the cost component of the installation of a fish passage. Because once you put a fish passage in, the game's not over. It's every year you have to maintain it for this window of passage, you know, and it's not a small thing. You have to, you know, not only are you maintaining the dam, you're now maintaining this fish passage. So it's, you know, it's not just as easy as, you know, we get to keep our dam, we put in a fish passage and everything's good, you know, because some fish passages, you know, two side by side, one performs well and the other one doesn't. And it's not as easy as just going there and staring at it and trying to figure out why one's doing good and one's not doing so good. So it's not a simple answer, but I will say that typically removals, you know, you get two things in one at once. You get, you know, fish passage, and you also get a lack of overhead in the form of maintenance of fish passage.
Thank you, Nate. Good question, Audra. Ken,
Yep.
Ken Gross, you had a question I think you wanted to pose that's in the Q&A. Can you pop in, Ken Gross? Hello, Ken. There he comes.
Sorry, I had to unmute, and yes, thanks, Bob. And I need to point out again, my name is Ken Gross. I grew up in Camden, and although I work at the Camden Public Library, I need to point out that my remarks here are as a concerned private citizen, and I am not speaking on behalf of the library. And I have just one question for you today, but Of course, I'm trying to make a point with this question. The topic of dam destruction has been talked about for over 2 years now, and I have attended every session that I have heard about and that the public has been welcome to attend. And from the start, the townspeople and the stakeholders have been asking for more sketches, more designs, and more choices. And at every step along the way, we have been led to believe that and told to wait for the design process, where we would be shown a range of sketches and a range of options. Well, are we not here at the design portion of the process? And we are not seeing a range of options. We are seeing the same old choice that we have seen before, and it is the one with the maximum amount of dam destruction and the maximum amount of destruction to the harbor front and harbor park. So my question is about the decision-making process. The Interfluve report of May 2019, for which the town paid tens of thousands of dollars, by the way, the Interfluve report listed 3 major options for proceeding with dam work. Option 1 was the least destructive and entailed preserving and maintaining the dam, while at the same time accommodating for fish passage. So my question is, who was in the room when it was decided to drop option 1 from the conversation? How was the decision made to steer all of our resources toward the most destructive option rather than the least destructive option? Clearly, the public was not invited to that meeting, because if we had known about it, the outcome would not have been this single and singularly destructive option. To summarize, who was there and how was that decision made? Thank you.
Allison.
Yeah, so no decision has, no decision has been made. We definitely understand that your comments represent a portion of the population, but we've also received a lot of additional input. And one of those major pieces of input has been that the minimizing the use of taxpayer funds combined with the urgency of planning for climate change. And so at this stage, and then the other thing is that we've been told we should be applying, looking for grant opportunities. And so we are pursuing options to be able to present to voters this option. We do not have infinite town resources to be able to fund the design of the status quo. We know what the status quo looks like already. And there are certainly some options that can be, maybe looked at down the road if something doesn't pass here. But what we want to be able to do here is present people with an option that meets the town's climate change and resiliency goals. People in Camden have spoken very clearly that they want us to be following the recommendations of the Maine Climate Council, preparing for sea level rise, preparing for climate change. And there's funding available to do things that restore habitat and increase resiliency to climate change. And so how can we turn down these opportunities to say, a lot of these goals are Camden goals. I know they are. The people that elect us, we've been elected to try to do the best we can in approximating what the goals of Camden residents are. And so we are presenting an option. This is the idea of this is not to say this is what everybody has to vote on. It's to say, if, even for the people that might not want this in the end, if we do remove the dam, this is an option, and how can we make that sort of the most acceptable as possible. But there are multiple things being shown here. There are not, that's what this design is about. It's about the eternal debate of bridges in, the public landing and Harbor Park. There are things that have been asked for multiple times, even, the downtown master plan, that Camden residents have asked that we revisit. This is an opportunity to try to do that. But the thing is, there's grant funding available from their scientists that have gotten together and said, the best thing for towns to do right now and people that own infrastructure is to plan in this way. And because scientists agree so strongly that this is the best thing to do, there is funding available for planning that goes in one direction, and there's not funding available for planning that goes in a different direction. And so we feel the obligation to pursue sort of that science-based solution the best we can. In the long run, there'll always be opportunities for the people to vote that down and say we want to fund our own solution that is not based.
And this project it's a grant funded project, Ken. And the whole purpose of the funding that we were given to design this was to do something that was fulfilling climate change and flood resiliency goals, as well as habitat restoration. So all the other solutions that were in that interfluve report are not going to be, they're not achieving the goals of this grant program that we have to do this study right now.
Thanks,
And,
Audrey.
and Matt's nodding his head because he's on the panel who helped fund this project and choose it as a project to be funded. You know, if we came back and said, oh, here's our fish ladder and we're going to keep the dam as it is, we probably wouldn't get this, the engineering and design work funded, or we'd probably have to give our funding back, because that is not what they want to see from us.
So we're conforming to the demands of the grant giver.
Well, we got a grant. We've got to fulfill the obligations of this grant. So if we go through this process and we find that people don't like the outcome and they don't like the design, then we have to go back to the drawing board. But this is a grant funded project with expectations and requirements, and we have to fulfill them.
Audra, thank you very much. With that, we only have a couple minutes left, and poor Dennis has had his hand up for about 15.
Peter Gross also has raised his hand and hasn't had a chance to speak yet, just to point that out.
Both of them. Dennis, you had your hand up first.
Okay, I just wanted to say, as a physicist and as an engineer, I fully endorse a science-based approach. I do think that sea level rise is the dominant factor that we have to take into account, because it's going to affect the entire town, not just this project that we're working on now. Because in Harbor Park alone, because of the slope, just in the next 30 years, the water is going to come up 18 to 25 feet further than it does today. And in the future, if we don't plan for at least that, and whatever plan we come up with has to be adaptable for even further encroachment in the future, we would be unwise to just take money today for a grant for something which is driven, it seems to me, more by the fish restoration than it is by sea level rise. So I agree with Ken's comments, and I'm very concerned that we take a more objective approach at looking at all the options than we have so far, at least in my opinion.
Thank you, Dennis. We're already at time, but I want Mr. Gross, I hope you're not brothers, in the chat. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. We are brothers. I'm the older one. I'm going to make my comments brief because I know we're running over time. But what I've heard today really seems to stem from, as Allison just said, an effort to try to save the taxpayers money. I'd like to see the full picture before I vote to take the dam out. What's it going to cost to do the rest of the restoration work all the way up the river? I mean, Nate was saying that fish ladders are all well and good, but they don't always work. They're expensive to maintain. The only way you're going to get fish up to the upper river or up to McGonagall Lake is fish ladders or something along those lines, because those dams aren't going anywhere, as you said earlier. So I think that's a big part of what you're trying to get across here and sell, but that part hasn't been answered, in my opinion. You've also showed a bunch of very beguiling drawings of what could be done behind the buildings, footbridges, all kinds of things, picnic tables on the island. All sounds great. Again, who's paying for that? Who's maintaining it in the future? If you're trying to say that removing the dam and the wall is a way of saving money, I want to see the full picture. I'd like to really see what the impacts are going forward of some of the things that aren't in your study so far. Thank you. And I appreciate all your hard work. I really do. I've been in your shoes.
Peter, thanks for coming in. Always good to hear from you. Thank you very much. We could go on and on, but we are at the stop point, and I'm going to call this and thank everybody, especially for the 3 sessions, Matt and Nate, for coming on board, all the work that was put into this, and all of the comments and questions have all been good. Thank you so much, everybody, and those who aren't here from the last 2 sessions, and have a great 4th of July weekend and enjoy this not so great weather. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Take care.